with a man. Do, 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 do. I'll be the man. I'll be the man. Welcome back to Regency Rumors. I'm Kayla, and here on my channel I explore period dramas, history, and historical fiction, and today we're looking at the ups and downs of the music industry in the 18th century by exploring the life of a Regency-era singer with a career with as many ups and downs as Miss Taylor Allison Swift herself. With the new Taylor Swift album, Tortured Poets Society, coming out recently, and Bridgerton Season 3, I thought it would be interesting to do a bit of a deep dive into the Regency version of Taylor Swift, someone who would have been a well-known and popular singer at the time of maybe the Bridgerton family, or perhaps in real life Jane Austen and her family, who could have attended performances or at least have heard about it in the newspapers. Now, obviously times were a lot different back then. Women were not able to have the level of autonomy they are today or the careers, and it wasn't as easy to travel in the 18th century. So the idea of an international superstar like we would think today just wasn't possible. Plus, people are individuals, their stories are going to be different, so please do keep in mind when I'm talking about this artist compared to Taylor Swift, there's a lot of things that won't line up, but I think it would be really interesting to look at the life of someone who had similar popularity, at least European-wise at the time, and was known for her career as a singer, as an entrepreneur, who also had a lot of bumps along the way with her career, and a bit of a roller coaster reputation. So who was the Regency version of Taylor Swift? Angelica Catalini, an Italian opera singer who lived from 1780 to 1849, was known as a huge star across the UK and Europe, and was considered the most famous prima donna for almost a decade. So I'm going to talk a bit about Angelica's life, and then I'm going to draw a few comparisons of Angelica's career to Taylor Swift. Remember, again, these are two different people with different lives. This is just a fun video about learning about music culture in the 18th century. Look into the life of a singer from the past by drawing some comparisons of things that we know about a modern singer today. In a time when it was hard to gain success coming from a working class background, Catalini defied the odds as the daughter of a tradesman to be one of the most famous and well-revered singers of her time, as a soprano whose range was nearly 3 octaves. However, her life was not all bejeweled, and the circumstances of women having limited autonomy and not being treated as equally as men meant that her attempts to build a life of success and security was undermined at many terms in her life, even resulting in her being held hostage by Napoleon himself. Angelica Catalini's story is one of perseverance, hard work, and heart. Though her life had many ups and downs, she withheld a career as a beloved singer in the opera scene, alongside big artists such as Beethoven and Rossini. The French artist Vigée Lebrun painted her here and commented on her singing style, saying, "Her voice, one of the most astounding that one could hear, combined with a prodigious range, with a lightness that was nothing short of miraculous. She was enchanting in the manner of a nightingale." Angelica was born on May 10th, 1780 in Italy, and she was the daughter of a tradesman, and like many of us, was brought up singing in church. I'm looking at you, Jessica Simpson and Britney Spears. Angelica was sent to a convent in Rome at about 12 years old, where her beautiful voice was recognized by the nuns there. So her voice was so popular that she became a distraction to church services. People would come in throngs to hear her voice, so much so that the local bishop was informed that he had to do something about it because people were not paying attention to his sermons. So Angelica's father didn't want her to become a singer. He was a really pious man, so he was wanting her to become a nun, but she'd become so popular as a performer, and she was so dedicated to the craft that she made herself ill, and he had to bring her home to recover. And seeing how passionate she was, he finally agreed to let let her train. And at 16, she was sent to an opera house because the prima donna at the time had died suddenly and they needed a last-minute replacement. And this performance began the most successful trajectory of her career, and it launched her into being a well-loved artist and a talented soprano. So from there, she began performing around Italy in major cities like Milan, Florence, and Naples. And eventually she caught the eye of the Prince Regent of Portugal, and he invited her to sing at an Italian opera there in 1804. This was the first time that she'd made a huge salary from a performance. She made around the equivalent of $300,000, which was a huge sum of money for a woman to make at the time. It's a huge amount of money today, but especially for a woman of the time to make that sort of money, it was a huge accomplishment for Angelica at such a young age. As her fame began to rise, she started being invited to venues across Europe, and she started to get male attention. So while in Portugal, she met and married a man named Paul Valabregu. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He was a French attaché at Lisbon, and the two fell in love and married in 1804. Her father originally was not for the match. He believed that Paul didn't have the level of a career that Angelica had, and he forbade them from getting married. But then she refused to perform if the two of them couldn't be together. She sent a bunch of love letters, and she languished in her private quarters, and she refused to get on stage. Eventually, she went over the head of her father and appealed to the Prince Regent, and he saw how in love that the couple were. She convinced him that the two of them should be married, and he sanctioned the match. While it seems as if she was in love with him, a biography written about her life insinuated that he probably wasn't the best match. A book of biographies of musicians and music by Julian Marshall commented of her husband. Her husband appears to have no ideas beyond helping his talented wife to gain the utmost possible amount of money on every occasion, and spending it for her afterwards. From their marriage dates one of the worst of the many speculations that have been based on the capital of a grand voice and grand personal charm. I feel like time and time again, we've heard stories of popular female performers who have had male managers who are either their fathers or a romantic partner, and are extremely focused on making money through these talented women, controlling their careers in one way or the other, and then being the majority of the control of their earnings. And it's so sad to see that this kind of thing goes all the way back to the 1800s. I mean, I'm not surprised, but it's still so infuriating to kind of look at this and see that it was happening way back then. As well as her huge rise to fame, Taylor Swift is pretty vocal about the role male music executives have played in her career, the disappointments that she's felt in her music being sold without her knowledge to a male producer that she never wished to own it, and how that was such an undermining experience in her career. Wouldn't you know it, Angelica also struggled with having men undermine and control her career, the most notable instance being when Napoleon Bonaparte himself tried to control where she performed during the height of the French Revolution. So after her performances in Portugal and Italy, she then moved on to other major cities like Madrid and Paris, and by the time word of her angelic voice had traveled throughout Europe, she was making huge sums of money. So Angelica signed contracts in theaters in London for a large number of performances and was set to travel to the UK, but Napoleon decided he had other plans. Upon seeing her perform in the early 1800s, he became enamored with her, and he offered her a lucrative deal to stay in Paris and perform exclusively there at the Italian Opera. Having already signed contracts in London, she would have been missing out on a huge amount of money, not to mention she would have been in breach of contract had she not reached the UK, but Napoleon's offer to stay in Paris wasn't really an offer in the first place. He held Angelica's passport and forbade her from traveling. Allegedly, he said to her, "Remain in Paris. I will pay you well, and your talents will be appreciated. You shall receive 100,000 francs per annum and 2 months for vacation. So that is settled. Adieu, madam." Under pressure to fulfill her obligations, arrangements had to be made for Angelica to flee Paris with a different identity so that she wouldn't be caught. Dressed as a nun, you can see the irony here. I'm sure her father loved that. She managed to escape out of France and make it to London without Napoleon finding out, and then she performed in London for many years. She said of her experience, When at Paris, I was denied a passport. However, I got introduced to Talleyrand, and by the aid of a handful of gold, I was put into a government boat and ordered to lie down to avoid being shot. And wonderful to relate, I got over in safety with my little boy 7 months old. I cannot imagine being such a famous singer and having a 7-month-old child in tow and having to escape the notorious Napoleon himself to save my career. Absolute madness. So Angelica remained in the UK for about 7 years. Some of that was because of her disdain for Napoleon. Beyond her singing career, though, she tried her hand at being an entrepreneur. She attempted to buy and manage an opera house in London in 1813. And that was kind of the equivalent of a Vegas residency. So she would have been the sole proprietor, the sole manager, the sole singer of her theater, and then audiences could travel to her to hear her perform rather than her going out on tour, which I'm sure made sense for her family if she, had young children. And also it seemed like it was, dangerous on the road for her on occasion. So I get it. But that fell through for some reason. And then she went on to Paris to attempt the same thing, where she managed the Italian opera house there. And in my research, it was unclear to me why this didn't work out, but apparently it was a mess. It wasn't well managed. She frequently had to go back on the road in order to keep the business afloat, and eventually she gave it up altogether. For all that happening to her, though, I think the end of her career is really commendable. In 1830, she decided to open a tuition-free singing academy for girls, and that's what she did for the last years of her life. Angelica died of cholera in 1849 at the age of 69, and at the time there was a lot of singers' careers who ebbed and flowed as they got older, especially for women, and their popularity died down as they aged, but it didn't seem like Angelica was one of those singers. While of course in her older age she wasn't one of the up-and-coming it girls, when she would return to London and Paris years down the line and perform, she was still met with loads of enthusiasm from audiences. Angelica Catalini never seemed like a has-been. She was more of just a seasoned legend. Like Taylor Swift and every other female performer ever, Angelica's looks were assessed alongside her talents. Leigh Hunt, who was a male English poet, an essayist, and a critic during Angelica's lifetime, said of her appearance, "She was a Roman with the regular Italian antelope face, if I may so call it. Large eyes with a sensitive, elegant nose, and a lively expression." Thank you so much. I love the compliment. So amazing. Thanks for calling me an antelope face. I feel beautiful. Well, some of that quote was positive. Who says that a woman has an antelope face? Like, seriously? Let's calm ourselves. Let's calm ourselves. Let's calm ourselves. Let's calm ourselves. Calm ourselves, let's calm ourselves, let's calm ourselves. So there was a lot of talk about Angelica's humility, fairness, meekness, and kind of comparing her to other singers as if her life was untarnished, or because she was religious or virtuous, that she was a woman who should be put on a pedestal. I think in her professional life, she had to be so careful about keeping her image that way so that she wouldn't be vilified like other female singers of the time. There's so much about these women needing to be untarnished, having perfect reputations at the time. These singers almost needed to be like porcelain dolls to the public. One quote said of her, "In the midst, however, of these most trying circumstances, in which a beautiful and captivating woman could be placed, surrounded by temptation and flattery, her course was marked by undeviating propriety, and not the faintest breath tarnished her fair fame." So her personal life was a bit of a mess. She lived a quite lavish lifestyle that her husband mismanaged behind closed doors, and he gambled away a lot of their fortune and their future. But if that was a point of contention in their marriage, it didn't show to the general public. While there was whispers of what was going on privately, that wasn't reflected on what she brought to the stage. So, like Taylor Swift, and I'm going to try not and get in trouble with the Swifties here. I like Taylor Swift as well, but I'm hoping what I'm going to say, the Swifties are going to agree with me on this. Angelica's voice, while it was well renowned, she was more known for her unique style and her ability as a performer than she was for having the most impressive voice in the room. I feel like Taylor Swift is kind of similar. She has a beautiful singing voice, but we're more impressed with like her vision as a songwriter, her music composition, her dedication to her performances, and wanting to make music that's kind of unique to her. And it seemed like Angelica was that way as well. When I was researching music at this time period, people were really obsessed with the way that the neck moved when they watched people perform, the way their lips were pursed, how much sound was coming out of their mouths when they were singing, which of course today we don't think about because we have mics, we have recorded performances, and so it's much more about the lyrics and the performance themselves. But back then, because you would be able to watch it live, and only that one time live unless you went back and back again, there was more of an emphasis on the way that performers moved their mouths compared to others, the way their necks strained compared to others, and kind of comparing different performers based on their facial expressions and the way that their mouths moved. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know why you would obsess over how strained somebody's neck would get, but hey, if you're watching them live, then that's the only thing you have to go on. So there you go. In that same vein, not everyone loved Catalini's voice, which is typical of performers today as well. You can have your own opinion. It was said that Queen Charlotte wished that she had cotton buds in her ears while Angelica sang, which sounds a bit mean, but also quite humorous. All that to say, it seemed like she was a really comfortable performer at the time. She knew what her lane was and she was okay with staying in it, which also sounds like singers like Taylor Swift. While Angelica cared about putting on a good performance for audiences, she was less worried about being compared to heavyweights or being a highly trained opera singer, and she instead focused more on her performances, what made her unique. It was said that she wasn't afraid to be lighthearted and a bit silly during some of her performances. There's a story where she went to a pub in Bangor in North Wales where she started to get out pots and pans and play around with them while she was singing and dancing. It seemed like she took her career seriously, but she was willing to cut loose and have a bit of fun sometimes and enjoy being talented, but also being relatable to her audiences as a real person. So in Taylor Swift's latest album, Tortured Poets Department, there's a song called Clara Bow, which essentially talks about the experience of fame for young women like Clara Bow in the 1930s, like Stevie Nicks in the 1970s, and then Taylor Swift currently, and how society and the entertainment industry treat them and judge women in a way that they chew them up and spit them back out. And I definitely feel like the Regency era singer, Angelica Catalini, she could be included in this list as an even older example. Angelica lived in the height of the prima donna, which was a phrase we still use today to describe high maintenance or fussy, over-the-top women, but prima donna just meant first woman of an opera company, which counterbalanced the primo uomo, I hope I'm saying that right, which was first man of the opera, which originally had been a castrato. But as a prima donna herself, Angelica always had eagle eyes on her career and how she handled it, as real prima donnas at the time had a reputation of being difficult, passionate, or high-strung. Rupert Christensen argued that the stereotype for prima donnas being over-the-top or diva-ish was unfair for these opera singers, however. He says, "Opera has always been a highly strung profession, running on dynamic and creative clashes of will and temperament. Given such a gamble in such circumstances, a woman had to be alert and aggressive to survive. Acting the prima donna may have been the only way to avoid exploitation, and a prima donna's greed was often the hard-headed refusal to work for less than her market value. Her celebrated whims, too, often had solid reasoning behind them. A woman who refuses compromises is a prima donna. A woman dedicated to her talent is a prima donna." I just wanted to say, I think it's important to have conversations around environmentalism and the cost of living in today's society, and about, top performers like Taylor Swift and how their overwhelming fame can contribute to these things, and I don't want to ignore that. But what I am wanting to say in terms of female performers like Taylor Swift and so many other women throughout history is that control over their creative outputs has been a hill to climb. And along the way, many of these women have been called high maintenance or fussy, controlling, over the top. For men, this would just be seen as them being dedicated to their careers. Angelica Catalini's life and music career is proof that women could be successful and revered and respected in a time where women had very little mobility and autonomy. However, she's also proof that the judgment and stereotypes that we put on female performers goes back hundreds of years. But I like learning about Christensen's definition of a prima donna for performers like Angelica Catalini and Taylor Swift. A woman who is dedicated to her talent is a prima donna. Thanks for watching this video. I'm a very small channel. I'm a fairly new one. I'm still learning what I am doing, and I'm putting a lot of time into these videos when I'm able to make them. So if you've liked this, if you love period dramas or historical perspectives of things like Bridgerton, historical fiction, then please do consider giving a like, a share, a follow. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have any suggestions for other Regency or period drama related content, let me know. Bye!